There are places where the world grows thin, where the wind carries whispers not meant for living ears, and the trees remember what should have been forgotten. Tonight, we walk these shadowed paths together. This is the Forsaken Folklore. And as the last light fades, we bring you tales from forests where time stands still, and something always watches from the deep dark between the trees. So turn your lights low, listen closely, and remember, some stories don't just want to be heard. They want to be believed. Growing up in the quiet suburb of Crestview, my childhood home bordered a sprawling woodland we called Elmwood Forest. These woods became our playground, where my best friend Daniel and I spent countless afternoons building forts, staging epic battles with sticks as swords, and exploring every inch of the winding trails that connected our neighborhood. When I was 7, my family moved across town, but we often returned to visit old neighbors. On one such visit when I was 13, Daniel and I found ourselves reminiscing in his basement. Out of nowhere, he asked, "Remember that clown we saw in the woods behind your old house?" I laughed it off. A clown? In our woods? Surely I'd remember something that bizarre. But Daniel insisted with unsettling detail. We were running down the main trail, turned the bend near the big oak, and there he was, just standing there in full clown makeup, staring. We bolted back to your house so fast we nearly tripped over our own feet. The way he described it triggered something. A fleeting image flashed in my mind, a pale face with exaggerated features peering from between the trees. But I convinced myself it must have been one of those inflatable punching bag clowns left discarded in the woods. Yet Daniel brought it up again 5 years later, then once more in our 20s, each time with the same unwavering certainty. "You looked right at me, your eyes huge with fear," he'd say. We both saw it. Now, at 38, that half-remembered moment still haunts me. Elmwood Forest has since been developed into a park, but sometimes I drive past and stare at that fateful bend in the trail. Daniel and I don't talk much anymore, but I often wonder, did we actually encounter something inexplicable that day? The mind plays tricks, especially childhood memories. But the way Daniel's story never changed over 30 years, the visceral fear I feel whenever I think about it, makes me question everything. Was it a prankster? A hallucination? Or something far stranger lurking in those woods that only children can see? I'll probably never know for certain. But to this day, I can't look at a clown without feeling an icy finger trail down my spine. Some memories, real or imagined, leave marks that never fully fade. Let me tell you about the most bizarre experience I've had at our local Oakridge Park here in Portland. It's not some remote wilderness, just a typical suburban park with walking trails bordered by a narrow stretch of woods, maybe 300 feet wide by half a mile long. There's a few small creeks back there, though only one usually has water. It's the kind of place where you'll always see families biking or kids playing. One afternoon around 4 p.m., I took my bulldog, Daisy, for our usual walk. We just started down the trail when something extraordinary happened. As we rounded a bend, I suddenly felt this incredible surge of well-being, like all my minor aches vanished and I was filled with childlike energy. I remember thinking, I feel amazing, like I'm brand new, then the bushes ahead exploded with movement. Something large released its grip on a thicket, making an enormous rustling sound. Daisy went wild, lunging toward the disturbance with such force I nearly lost my grip on her leash. Whatever it was crashed through another cluster of bushes, making deep, resonant thumps with each step, like two massive horses stomping in unison. Here's what terrified me. I could clearly see the vegetation moving as something passed through, but there was nothing there. The grass flattened under invisible weight about 15 feet away. When I focused, I could actually see impressions forming in the tall grass to distinct footprints appearing with each thunderous step. Then the stomping began. The ground vibrated beneath us with each impact, the sound so deep it made my eardrums ache. For 15 terrifying seconds, this invisible giant pounded the earth before suddenly going silent. Strangest of all, I never felt afraid during the encounter, just intensely curious. In the weeks that followed, I heard similar heavy footsteps 3 more times in different parts of the woods. Once, I distinctly thought, "It wants me to go into the woods after it," and the sounds immediately stopped, as if whatever it was could hear my thoughts. The most chilling moment came weeks later. I paused to admire the beautiful sunlight filtering through the trees when for just a split second, I saw it, a massive humanoid shape easily 10 feet tall with shoulders like a linebacker moving between trees about 80 feet away. It had that distorted, cloaked appearance like the predator from the movies, barely visible except for a slight shimmer. I've started carrying pepper spray and always tell someone my route before walking there now. Daisy still reacts strongly to certain spots along the trail. Whatever shares those woods with us remains a mystery, but one thing's certain: it knows we're there, and I'm not entirely convinced it's always invisible. Has anyone else experienced something similar in Oakridge Park? The rational part of me wants to believe there's some logical explanation, but what I saw, what I heard, it defies everything I thought I knew about the world. My best friend Clara and I have taken our children to Blackthorn Woods near Brighton for years. It's always been a peaceful place until last Tuesday morning when something profoundly unsettling happened. We entered the woods around 10 a.m. with Clara's 7-year-old twins, my 4-year-old daughter Lily, and our 2 dogs. From the moment we stepped onto the trail, the atmosphere felt wrong. Both dogs were agitated, but my spaniel Daisy kept whimpering and barking at nothing. Lily, who normally runs ahead, clung to my hand the entire time. The woods have 2 main paths, an upper ridge trail and a lower valley path. The twins raced ahead up the steep slope to the upper trail, something they've done dozens of times before, with Clara's Labrador Max following them. Then, in the blink of an eye, they vanished. Not just out of sight, but eerily silent. Clara called for them, her voice tight with panic. That's when we heard it, a dog's agonized screams coming from the valley below. The sound was unbearable, like an animal being tortured. Clara started scrambling down the slope toward the cries when I spotted Max trotting toward us from the direction the twins had disappeared. The moment he appeared, the screaming stopped. Then a woman's voice called from the ridge above, "They're coming back down the main path." We shouted our thanks, but when we looked up, no one was there. 50 deer suddenly burst from the trees, stampeding through the valley where the screams had originated. When we reunited with the twins, their faces were white as chalk. They said a shiny-faced lady from their school had told them which path to take, though neither Clara nor I recognized the description. They'd heard us calling, but said their shouts went unanswered. As we left, I kept hearing a strange bell-like sound in the trees. The dogs growled at empty spaces. Whatever happened in those woods, it felt deliberate, like something was trying to separate us. Local folklore mentions a shining lady who appears before tragedies in these woods. After Tuesday's events, I believe those stories. There's something in Blackthorn Woods that knows how to mimic, how to lure, and how to disappear without a trace. We won't be going back. Has anyone else experienced something similar in these woods? The rational part of me wants explanations, but the mother in me just wants to keep my daughter far away from whatever we encountered that day. Let me tell you about the strangest place in our otherwise ordinary suburban neighborhood, the Willow Creek Nature Preserve. On the surface, it's just a small patch of woods between housing developments, Maybe 5 acres of scraggly oaks and underbrush that you'd drive past without a second thought. But every time I walked its trails, even in broad daylight, I got this crawling sensation of being watched, not imagined, but truly observed by something conscious. Last summer, I convinced 4 friends to investigate after dark. There was Jake, our resident skeptic who marched ahead confidently, while the rest of us, Mia, Ryan, Olivia, and I, stuck close together, our nervous laughter fading as we ventured deeper. The change happened suddenly. One moment, we were joking about ghost stories. The next, an oppressive weight crushed down on us. My vision swam. The air turned thick as syrup. Mia stumbled into me, her face pale. My head, she gasped. It's like something's squeezing my skull. We called for Jake, but only silence answered. That's when we ran, branches whipping at our faces as we fled toward the parking lot. When we reached my car, the interior light was on, though I definitely locked it. The doors were shut, no windows broken, but that glowing bulb felt like a violation. Then Jake emerged from the trees, casually chewing gum. "What's everyone freaking out about?" he asked. When we described the suffocating pressure, the warnings we'd felt, he just laughed. Weird, I didn't feel anything. Actually, I dared whatever's in there to show itself. The way he said it made my skin crawl. That preserve has stood untouched for years while developments grew around it. The city claims it's protected wetlands, but old rumors whisper about missing pets, about a farmer who hanged himself there in the 1930s. I still see those woods every day on my commute. The trees don't move with the wind like they should. Sometimes at dusk, the shadows between trunks look a shade too dark. Jake insists we go back, says he wants to prove nothing's there. The rest of us won't step foot on those trails again, because whatever lives in Willow Creek Preserve noticed us that night. And I think it's still watching, waiting for someone foolish enough to take Jake up on his dare. 2 years ago, my friend Sarah and I made a discovery that would change everything. We were hiking through Blackwood Forest, just outside our small town of Millfield, when we stumbled upon something completely out of place, a shattered mirror leaning against an ancient oak tree, its surface cracked, but still reflecting the dim forest light. Out of curiosity, I picked up a shard, slipping it into my pocket without much thought. That simple act, I believe, opened a door we were never meant to open. Strange things began happening almost immediately. Shadows moved where there should have been none, whispers echoed through empty rooms, and an unshakable feeling of being watched settled over us. The worst encounter came on Halloween night. We were walking our usual trail through the forest when Sarah suddenly froze. "Something's behind us," she whispered. I turned, expecting maybe a raccoon or fox, but what I saw made my blood run cold. A dark mass about the size of a large dog shifted in the shadows. When I shone my flashlight on it, the thing stretched upward, growing taller, until it took the shape of a man. Not just any man, something wearing the approximation of human form. Its face stretched into a grin too wide, too full of teeth, when I accidentally apologized for shining the light on it. The moment I spoke, it stopped, tilted its head. Then it turned and walked back into the trees, disappearing like smoke. We returned to the mirror's location several times, each visit more unsettling than the last. The last time we went, the mirror was waiting for us again, though we'd left it shattered on the ground weeks before. I took another piece, against my better judgment. Now, the phenomena have followed us home. Sarah wakes with unexplained scratches. I scream in my sleep without remembering why. My brother tells me I shout warnings about the man in the mirror during these episodes. We've tried everything: sage, salt lines, even having a priest bless our homes. Nothing helps for long. The shards we took seemed to be anchors, tethering whatever the thing is to our world. I'm sharing this as a warning. Some things are broken for a reason. Some reflections show more than just your face. And some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again. If anyone knows how to break this connection, how to send back what we've unwillingly invited in, I'm listening. Because whatever came through that mirror is getting stronger, and I don't know how much longer we can hold it off. I live on what used to be the old Magnolia Grove estate in rural South Carolina. Our property borders an overgrown family cemetery dating back to the 1800s. My sister Rachel has always been into spiritual stuff, consulting with local psychics and mediums. I never put much stock in it until recently. Last year, Rachel visited a psychic in Charleston who told her something chilling. Don't go outside after dark. The deer here aren't really deer. We laughed it off. But then strange things started happening. We found perfect circles of animal bones in the woods. Rachel and her friends swear something chased them through the trees one night. And if you're outside after midnight, you'll often hear what sounds like extra footsteps keeping pace with your own. Last Thursday at 3 a.m., I was having a smoke in our old tobacco shed out front. I turned off my music and stood to leave when the most ungodly scream tore through the night. This wasn't a fox or owl. This sounded like a woman being murdered. The trees at the woodline started shaking violently. I froze, my entire body trembling. The screaming continued, shifting between agony and rage. When I finally gathered the courage to move, it screamed again, closer this time. I bolted for the house, hearing whatever it was crash through the underbrush parallel to me. The neighbors' dogs went wild as I fumbled with the back door. Rachel found me curled on the kitchen floor sobbing. She didn't laugh, just handed me a cup of tea and said, "Told you so. The old plantation ledgers mention slaves disappearing in those woods. Local legends talk about not dear creatures that look almost right, but move wrong, sound wrong. Last month, a hunter reported seeing a buck with human eyes watching him from the cemetery. I don't smoke outside at night anymore, and I keep seeing movement in the trees at dusk, shapes that stand too still, then vanish when you blink. Whatever's out there, it's getting bolder. Maybe those psychics knew more than we gave them credit for." I work as an environmental field technician for an oil and gas company in northern British Columbia. Last spring, my colleague Mark and I were assigned to survey an abandoned well site deep in the Black Spruce forest, about 80 kilometers from the nearest town. Our job was simple: locate and document any unregistered water wells in the area. We spent the first day bushwhacking through dense undergrowth, following overgrown trails that hadn't seen human traffic in decades. By late afternoon, we'd mapped 3 old wells and decided to return the following week to complete the survey. When we came back 7 days later, something impossible awaited us. Along the exact same trail we'd used previously, dozens of young spruce trees, each about as thick as my wrist, had been violently twisted and bent across the path. But this wasn't normal storm damage. Each tree had been perfectly spiraled at its base, like someone had wrung them out like wet towels before forcing them downward. The precision was unnatural. Mark, a biologist with 20 years of field experience, paled when he examined them. "This wasn't animals," he muttered. "And no windstorm does this." We both knew bears sometimes mark territory by biting saplings, but this was different. These trees weren't just bent, they'd been permanently deformed in perfect corkscrew patterns. What disturbed me most was how deliberate it felt. Every damaged tree lined our exact path from the previous visit. The scientific part of my brain suggested maybe a microburst or small tornado could explain it, but there was no other storm damage anywhere in the area. Just this one 200-meter stretch of trail, exactly where we'd walked before. We completed our survey quickly that day, neither of us voicing what we were both thinking. The local First Nations communities have stories about the Bushman, a wilderness spirit that warns people away from certain areas. As we packed up our gear, Mark quietly mentioned we might want to report this site as unsuitable for further development. I've seen a lot of strange things in my years working remote field sites, but nothing like this. Whatever twisted those trees didn't want us there. And frankly, I have no intention of finding out what it might do next time. When I was 11 years old, my younger sister Emma and I had a strange encounter that still haunts me today. Our family owned a small plot in the terraced farmlands near Willow Ridge, about 2 miles from our village. The area was peaceful but isolated, with dense groves of cedar trees separating the stepped fields. One sunny afternoon around 2 p.m., we brought lunch to our grandfather, who was tending the crops. After eating together, we began the walk home, carrying bundles of firewood. About halfway down the winding path, we both clearly heard a familiar voice call out, "Children, come here." It sounded exactly like Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor who often gathered goat fodder in these fields. We looked up the slope and saw a figure matching her appearance standing near the top terrace, wearing Mrs. Henderson's distinctive blue headscarf and floral apron. "Go see what she wants," I told Emma, staying behind with the wood. As my sister climbed the terraces, I noticed how unnaturally quiet the valley had become. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just oppressive silence. My legs began trembling uncontrollably. Emma returned pale-faced. "There's no one up there," she whispered. We practically ran the rest of the way home. That evening, we visited Mrs. Henderson's house. When we asked if she'd been in the fields that afternoon, she seemed genuinely confused. "I haven't left my house all day," she said, showing us the knitting she'd been working on since morning. To this day, I can't explain what we saw and heard. The figure had looked and sounded exactly like Mrs. Henderson. Was it some trick of the light? A spirit mimicking her appearance? Or something else entirely? Sometimes when I visit those terraces now, I catch myself scanning the upper ridges, half expecting to see that blue headscarf fluttering in the breeze. But the fields remain empty, just as they were when my sister climbed up to find nothing there. I grew up in a rural farming community called Millfield, where the back roads wound through fields of wheat and corn before giving way to dense thickets of birch trees. My best friend Lucas and I spent most of our childhood exploring the overgrown pasture that bordered what we called the Spindly Woods, a patch of skinny white birch trees so closely packed together you could barely walk between them. One humid afternoon when we were about 12, we were doing our usual routine, smacking sticks against fence posts and daring each other to venture deeper into the birch grove than we'd gone before. The summer insects droned in the tall grass as we laughed about some stupid joke from school. Then, at exactly the same moment, we both froze. About 50 feet ahead, something stood motionless near the tree line. At first glance, I thought it was one of Farmer Henderson's escaped pigs. It had that same upturned snout. But as my eyes focused, the shape made less sense. It stood about as tall as a large dog, but its body was all wrong, too lean, with strange angular shoulders. The afternoon sun cast sharp shadows across its fur, skin. I couldn't tell. Then it moved. The creature took 3 deliberate steps sideways behind one of the thin birch trunks. I held my breath, waiting for it to emerge on the other side. The tree was barely wider than a fence post. There was no way it provided enough cover. Yet when I blinked, the thing was simply gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Lucas didn't answer. When I turned, he was already 20 yards away, sprinting across the pasture like the devil himself was after him. I'd never seen him move that fast, not even when Coach made us run suicides at basketball practice. That's when the real fear hit me, the kind that turns your bones to ice. I ran after him, my sneakers pounding the dry earth. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of Lucas's back porch, both of us gasping for air. When we finally looked back toward the woods, nothing stirred. No strange creatures, no rustling in the underbrush. Just the birch trees swaying gently in the summer breeze. That was 15 years ago. I still live in Millfield, though Lucas moved out west for college. Sometimes when I'm closing up the feed store after dark, I'll hear odd noises coming from the direction of those birch woods. Not the normal sounds of raccoons or foxes, but something else. Something that makes me walk just a little faster to my truck. The old-timers at the diner say there used to be a Native American burial ground somewhere near those woods. Others claim it's just tales spun by bored farm kids. All I know is that Lucas and I saw something that day, something that shouldn't exist. And part of me wonders if it's still out there, watching from between those skinny white trees, waiting for the next curious kid to wander too close. It was the final day of our advanced training at Fort Donovan. We just completed a grueling 20-mile ruck march to the Kilo 7 firing range for live ammunition exercises. Every muscle in my body screamed for rest as we set up camp near the tree line. Our platoon sergeant gave one unusual order before lights out. No one crosses the tree line after dark. If nature calls, use the porta potties. No exceptions. At the time, I figured it was just standard procedure to keep recruits from wandering off. But that night, I had the most vivid dream of my life. I found myself walking through morning woods, dew glistening on ferns, the air crisp with pine. At first, it was peaceful. Then whispers started, children giggling, women murmuring, all saying, "Keep looking for it." Suddenly, the forest went dead silent. A crushing dread pressed down until I collapsed, clawing at my ears. That's when I heard the bells. Soft jingling grew louder until it stopped right behind me. Hot breath hit my neck. I turned to see a nightmare, a moose-sized creature with a hyena's leathery face, human-like hands at the end of its front legs, and massive antlers. Its black eyes locked onto mine as a woman's voice sang. Then a guttural language flooded my mind like thick syrup. I woke at 3 a.m. drenched in sweat, just in time for fire watch. Standing guard near that forbidden tree line, I nearly stepped into the woods to relieve myself when a deer emerged. It froze, then walked backwards into the darkness, legs moving unnaturally like a rewound video. I pissed right there on the road. The next morning, I found an internet meme depicting my nightmare creature exactly. When I asked the sergeant about his warning, he just smiled and asked, "Do you believe in fairies?" My squad mates still joke about the forest spirit, but I don't laugh. Something lives in those woods at Fort Donovan, and I think it was trying to communicate with me. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood bordered by a large stretch of forest. My golden retriever, Max, and I have our daily walking routine, usually through the wooded trails. In summer, we go around 5 p.m., but during winter, I take him earlier, around 3 or 4, before darkness falls. Last week, I got home late from the gym. It was already past 7 p.m., and the winter night had swallowed the neighborhood in complete darkness. I leashed up Max and headed out. Almost immediately, I noticed something off. Max, who's normally bursting with energy on walks, stayed glued to my side, his body tense. I figured he was just nervous about the dark. We rarely walk this late. We entered the forest trail, the trees forming a tunnel of shadows around us. As we passed an old, boarded-up house near the path, I wandered a few steps ahead while Max sniffed around. When I turned back, he hadn't followed. "Max, come on, let's go home," I called out. He trotted over immediately. Then, just as I turned to continue walking, I heard it. My own voice echoed back at me, repeating the exact same words in the exact same tone, but it wasn't me. The voice came from the trees to our left, about 5 full seconds after I'd spoken. Too delayed to be an echo. Too precise to be random. I didn't think. I scooped up Max, a full-grown 70-pound dog, and ran. Past the abandoned house, down the trail, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I got home, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unclip Max's leash. 20 minutes later, my mom returned, and I spilled everything. She went pale. Then she told me her own experience from a week prior. While walking Max on the same trail, she'd seen a dog that wasn't right. It looked almost like a German shepherd, but its movements were wrong, its proportions just slightly off. It had stared at them from the tree line before slinking away. That night, around 11:30 p.m., I heard footsteps circling the house. My tabby cat, Luna, who never cares about the windows, sat frozen, staring at nothing in the dark. The next evening, distracted while on the phone with my mom, I accidentally let Max lead us back to the forest entrance. The usual trail light was out. As I called Max away from some grass, that voice came again, mimicking me, but not quite matching. We ran. Now, as I write this, we're preparing to sage the house. Whatever is in those woods knows my voice, and I think it's trying to learn how to use it. I've never been much of a camper. There's something about the isolation, the vulnerability, the way darkness consumes everything that never sat right with me. But back in 2014, my friend Tyler convinced me to spend a night camping on his family's private property near Blackwater Lake in rural Georgia. The land sat in that strange in-between space, not quite deep wilderness, but far enough from town to feel disconnected from civilization. The lake itself wasn't huge, maybe a football field across at its widest point, but surrounded by dense forest that made it feel enclosed. The only access was a single dirt road with a locked gate at the entrance, which we carefully secured behind us. We were completely alone. We set up a small tent near the water's edge, with just basic supplies, no alcohol or anything that might cloud our judgment. The night started peacefully enough, the stars reflecting off the still lake surface. Then Tyler suddenly stiffened next to me. "You see that?" he whispered, pointing across the water. At first, I saw nothing, just the dark tree line. Then I looked closer. Dozens of pale, round faces peered out from between the trees. Not full figures, just faces, glowing faintly in the darkness. They were too small to be adults, too perfectly still to be human. Their features were indistinct, like smoothed clay masks. We sat frozen for what felt like an eternity, watching these things watch us. Neither of us dared to speak above a whisper. Then, in unison, they were gone. The silence that followed was worse. From the far shore came the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the underbrush. Branches snapped, leaves rustled, the sounds carrying clearly across the still water. Whatever was over, there wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. We didn't sleep that night. Leaving was not an option. The thought of walking the dark road past whatever was in those woods terrified us more than staying put. At first light, we packed up and left. Years later, I still search for explanations. Ghost lights? Will-o'-the-wisps? Some Appalachian folklore I haven't discovered. Nothing quite fits. I haven't been camping since, and I don't plan to. Because sometimes I wonder if we hadn't noticed them watching us that night, Would they have stayed hidden? Or would they have crossed the lake to get a closer look? My friend Ryan, a former Marine, once told me a story that still gives me chills. This wasn't about combat. It happened during a routine training exercise deep in the forests of northern Michigan, in those dense woods where the air always feels too thick and the sunlight never quite reaches the ground. Ryan's unit had been hiking for hours through thick underbrush when he realized he'd gotten separated. At first, he wasn't worried. He'd trained for this. But after nearly an hour of wandering, every tree started looking identical. Every direction felt wrong. Then the forest went completely silent. No birds, no wind, just his own footsteps and the occasional rustling that always seemed to stop the moment he did. His radio crackled with static, but no voices came through. Just as dusk was settling, he spotted them, 3 figures in full marine gear standing motionless about 20 yards away. Relief washed over him until he got closer. Their uniforms were regulation, but faded like they'd been worn for years. One had a deep gash across his chest plate. Another's boots were caked in mud that didn't match the dry trail. Worst of all were their eyes unblinking, fixed stares. One slowly raised an arm, pointing toward the ridge with unnatural smoothness, like a marionette's movement. Exhausted and disoriented, Ryan followed their direction. When he finally stumbled into camp, his sergeant chewed him out for being the last one back. What 3 Marines? The sergeant asked when Ryan mentioned them. Everyone's accounted for. That night around the fire, an older Marine pulled him aside. You saw them, didn't you? He explained the legend. Decades ago, 3 Marines vanished during an exercise in those same woods. No bodies, no gear, just gone. Since then, lost soldiers sometimes report seeing them, silent, watching figures in outdated gear. Some say they guide people back to safety. Others claim they lead them deeper into the wilderness. Ryan never went back to those woods. He doesn't like talking about what he saw that day, but one thing's certain, those weren't living men. And whatever they were, they're still out there. I've always loved the wilderness, the kind of places where you can truly disconnect. A few years back, my friend Jake and I decided to camp deep in the Adirondack Mountains, far from any trails or campgrounds. We built a fire, cracked open some beers, and spent the evening laughing and tossing pine cones into the flames. Then I heard it. A faint sound cut through our conversation, something that didn't belong. I held up a hand. "Wait, quiet," I whispered. We both froze. Somewhere in the distance, barely audible over the crackling fire, a woman's voice floated through the trees. It wasn't just singing, it was something ancient, haunting, like a melody from another time. The notes echoed strangely, the words in no language I recognized. Not just foreign, but old. Forgotten. Our blood ran cold. We were miles from civilization, deliberately choosing this spot to avoid people. There shouldn't have been anyone out here. We barely slept that night. A few days later, I posted some campfire photos online. That's when my buddy Mark messaged me. "Dude, tell me you didn't hear anything weird up there?" I asked what he meant. Turns out, he and his brother had camped near that same ridge last summer. Around midnight, they heard a woman sobbing near the old logging road. Thinking someone was hurt, they grabbed a flashlight and followed the sound. The crying stopped the second they called out. No footsteps, no rustling, just silence. When they returned to camp, their German shepherd, Rex, was seizing by the fire, foaming at the mouth. They rushed him down the mountain, certain he was dying. Then, halfway to the trailhead, Rex just woke up, like nothing happened. Mark's voice dropped when I told him about the singing. A week later, He took me back to the exact spot where they'd heard the crying. My stomach twisted. It was the same clearing where Jake and I had listened to that unearthly song. I don't know what lingers in those mountains, but I do know this: I'm never going back there after dark. My mother grew up in a small coastal village near Laganoy in the Philippines. Her family was enormous, 11 siblings in total, living in a simple home with no running water, cooking meals over an open fire. Her father was a fisherman, her mother a homemaker. Life was hard but filled with strange, unexplainable events. One night in the 1950s, after my grandmother had just given birth to one of my uncles, my grandfather was outside preparing food over a fire. The night was pitch black, lit only by the moon and the flickering flames. He had tossed the afterbirth and birthing sheet over a young coconut tree, planning to bury it properly in the morning. Years later, he told my mother what happened next. As he crouched by the fire, he heard a wet, slurping noise. When he turned, he saw a hunched black figure with glowing red eyes feasting on the afterbirth. Most people would have run, but my grandfather acted fast. He grabbed a burning rock with his shirt and hurled it at the creature. It let out a guttural snarl and vanished into the trees. He quickly dug a hole, buried the remains, and covered it with hot coals to keep the thing away. But the next morning, the ground had been clawed open, and the sheet was gone. Thank you all for joining me on tonight's journey into the unknown. I hope these eerie tales from the woods left you glancing over your shoulder, or at least double-checking your locks. If you enjoyed these unsettling stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because next time, we're diving even deeper into the darkness. Until then, keep your lights bright, your curiosity sharper, and remember, some mysteries are best explored from the safety of your screen. Stay curious, and maybe sleep with a nightlight tonight.